Hello everyone, Imposter here. Welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. Today we're looking at hot hatches, specifically the Polo, and why you might want to consider it for your garage. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're looking at the Polo GTI and how you can utilize it in your garage for various tunes. The goal of this was to find something that's pretty cheap and lots of fun to drive. And so I figured it had to be a hot hatch. And what better one than one of the least expensive ones in the game, the Polo GTI. It's actually kind of surprising how much fun this car was. I didn't really know what to expect going into it as far as how far I could take it, but I knew what it was about without really even driving it. Didn't really have to drive it to be able to see that it needed some work to be a sporty vehicle. But yeah, I had some fun with this one. I think that it can actually go a little bit farther than even what I've done. I went from 500 to 550 to 600 with weight reduction and everything tacked to it. I think it can go all the way to 650. It was just a little bit tough to dial in at 600 with spring rates and damping and compression and all that. We'll go over it, but I think 600 might be kind of the top end that you'd want to go with this car. Other than that, it's just really fun to drive. It's so small, really lightweight. We start out around stock power, and I think we take it up to like 340. So we're going to jump right into it. I'm not even going to bother showing the stock tune because, I mean, it's a small hatchback that's made to go around city streets and move you from point A to point B. The GTI version's a little sportier than that. So wasn't much to work with there anyway. I think stock the car is like 440 performance points. So we jumped right up to 500. Good jump up. And that's probably where you'd want to start with it as well. So let's get started. Let's take a look. Alrighty guys, here we're going to look at 500 to start. And the goal here was basically to work on the handling first and foremost. This was a car, that was really squishy, had lots of body roll, even though being a small car, wasn't set up for handling at all really. So that was the goal here. So it didn't focus too much on power, mostly did suspension, braking, etc. So went up a tire step to Sports Hard. Fully customizable suspension right off the bat. I think that's the most helpful in kind of dialing this in. Lowered the overall body height, and then I kept the roll bars not super tight, just because I still wanted a little bit of play being on sports tires, but in turn, to kind of counteract it, I tightened up compression, expansion, and the spring rate, just to make it stiffer in the corners, a little bit flatter so that it doesn't have so much body roll, and then camber to help with that when you're mid-turn, and then toe to help you get in the turn. So I think the toe is basically zeroed out in the stock car, and so a little bit of toe up front, toe out helps. And same with the adjusted camber. I'm not sure exactly how noticeable it is, but through turns, it does help with grip. And then moving down to differential, I turned down acceleration sensitivity a good chunk just because, you don't need your differential lock too much, but also if you go too far the other way, like if you put this on 10, your differential is not going to lock enough, and on a front wheel drive car, that's not good because your inner wheel that has less grip going through a turn is just going to spin, and you're not going to be able to power out of a turn. So there's a balance. I think it was too sensitive and therefore causing a bunch of understeer. So that's why happy medium at 25. Full control computer at 100. Slight ballast with certain positioning and restriction for the power. Again, I usually just do that to get it right under the performance point limit that I'm trying to abide by. So in this case, it got me about a quarter of a performance point under the 500 limit with the specs I have here. I did go straight away for a high RPM turbo. It actually didn't do too much on this engine just because it's a smaller engine, but it's there to help. Certainly noticeable. Racing intercooler, racing air filter, semi-racing muffler, and then race brakes with race pads. And that is 500. So let's see how it feels out on the track. Alrighty, here we are at Tsukuba. I chose Tsukuba just because it's a shorter track. Didn't want to spend too much time behind the wheel. these. It's not really necessary on this car. Obviously not a very big car, doesn't get hugely powerful. So in my mind, it didn't need a ton of tuning and finagling. They're pretty straightforward for what they are. But as I mentioned, with 500, we focused largely on the feel of suspension because the stock car just wiggles all over the place. It has huge amounts of body roll. It's really just not that much fun to drive. In 450 form, it's fine. I don't think you really need to tune a car that much. Once you get up to 500, I think it really does make a big difference being able to lower the car and kind of stiffen it up. So that's what the goal was here. And being front wheel drive, obviously you have the risk of understeer, but I do think it's fairly easy to mitigate. You can kind of feel it a pretty good amount through your steering wheel. So with the stiffer springs and the anti-roll bars softened up a little bit, it is pretty nicely balanced. You just have to be wary of getting on the throttle out of the turns, and that kind of goes across the board for all these tunes. But more than anything, I stiffened up the suspension so that it would be easier to transfer power to the outside wheel, and your inside wheel isn't just spinning away all the power as you exit a turn. I think I did a nice job there. But anyway, pretty straightforward on the 500 tune. Alrighty guys, next up is 550 for this little puppy. This is actually pretty close to 500 as far as specifications for suspension, everything goes. So suspension and differential basically stayed the same. The anti-roll bar in the rear is the only thing I think that I changed on this. And that's just because I didn't feel like it was too off balance, going from even sports hard to sports soft. So obviously changed tires, little modification in suspension there, and the rest of it is basically power. You can remove the ballast, remove the restriction. We come over here, we add a few more racing parts, exhaust manifold, and then the clutch, and that puts you just a tick below 550. So similar characteristics of handling compared to 500. This just has a bit more power. So the idea here is to kind of manage braking a little bit more. With more power comes more responsibility with managing understeer as well with a front wheel drive car. So that's just something to keep in mind when powering out of turns. It's obviously, you know, definitely manageable, but something to be aware of as the tune goes higher, even though, you know, I think we only gained 20-ish horsepower. Still noticeable in a car this size. So all these little things to keep in mind, but let's see what it looks like. Alright, so here we go for 550. And keep in mind, obviously it's pretty similar to 500, but the biggest difference is more power here. And with a front wheel drive car, again, the understeer is very prevalent. So just something to keep in mind. I think I made it much easier to hit braking zones in this car. There was so much dive from the front end, like going into this corner here. I braked a little bit late, but you can see I power out of it using the front wheel drive to my advantage. So that's why I left the differential a little bit tighter so that both wheels can lock and kind of pull you out of a turn as opposed to your inside wheels spinning away trying to pull you. And I think that increased the responsiveness overall exiting turns. And I think that does play advantage to this car versus that of something rear wheel drive where you're pulling yourself versus pushing and trying to reduce oversteer, drifting out of a corner. So obviously you don't have to worry about that with this car, but in turn you're getting out of corners faster and getting onto the straights with more speed. Know that though, with a lot of the front wheel drive cars in this game, the front axle suspension tuning is going to be your friend in getting out of corners faster. So that's 550. Alrighty guys, last but certainly not least, 600. This is actually a really fun one, but pay attention to this tune because it is pretty detailed in how many things change. So, racing tires, obviously hard tires. Body height stayed the same. Suspension got a little stiffer and the roll bars got much stiffer. So take a look at the frequencies here. Camber was adjusted slightly. Differential I didn't mess with, didn't feel like I needed to. Ballast I added back in just a little bit because if we go all the way over here to the right, you have a few more things to add. Bore up, stroke up, engine balance tuning, high lift cams, racing crank. Everything else is the same in this realm over here. And then you can fiddle with this a little bit with the performance adjustment for ballast and power restrictor to get it as close to 600 as possible. But look how this one behaves, because this is actually really surprising for this car. So So 600 was something that I didn't know how it was going to go. Honestly, you start out with a car that is as slow as this one is in stock form, and you go as high as 600 performance points. And, well, it's surprising, because this thing's really well balanced. Not very much body roll, not too much lean and dive forward and backwards, and obviously with the really grippy tires, it just makes it such an easy car to maneuver. And you have your race brakes, so it's really responsive going into turns with the grip you have from the tires. You don't have to worry about your inside tire spinning much faster than the outside one, worrying about grip too much, so we're right at that fine adjustment level where you can really just give it the full boot out of the turns and not have to worry about too much wheel spin. And with it being so stiff, in combo with the racing tires, it just feels the perfect amount of tautness. Like, you still have a little bit of flexibility, but it stays pretty darn flat through corners, and I think that really helps you to keep as much speed through the corners as possible. Obviously not a ton of top end speed, not a super high horsepower build, but the handling is key with this one, given it's such a small car. I think it'll do just fine keeping up with any other 600, and or getting around Tsukuba in 60 seconds. It's a different day. Forgot to record an outro for this video, so I'm doing it now. But guys, don't overlook the slower cars in the game, the less expensive cars, because I think these are actually a huge benefit to at least saving your money and getting the most out of a car that you possibly can. And so I'm actually probably going to do more videos on hot hatches, and the like, just because this was a lot of fun once we got it up to 600 performance points. 500 and 550 were fun too, but I'm actually going to use it in some races and see how it does, because even though, you know, it's not the fastest on the straights, but the AI on this game I think lack a little bit in the turns, and so that's going to be a huge benefit, I think, to cruising through some career mode races and whatnot. And you can do it in one of the least expensive cars in the game with the right tuning. You're golden. Thank you guys for watching. If you found some value in this video, please consider liking, please consider subscribing. There's more tuning videos where this one came from, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.